So this presentation will target going over the digestive and excretory systems with the goal of making our way through these organ systems as a wrap up to our year. The digestive system is tasked with a series of tasks that are mainly targeted at harvesting materials from your environment. This is how your body gets access to resources to power itself and build new tissues and go about repair. And so we can break that into five main parts for the digestive system. Ingestion, bringing food in. This occurs when you use your mouth and your teeth to access and gather food and then introduce it into the system. We have mechanical processing. This is ripping and tearing and making the food into smaller pieces, which makes it easier to fit down the digestive tract and also increases the surface area to speed digestion. So if you have a large piece versus a lot of small pieces, the small pieces are easier to digest, which is part of the goal of mechanical processing. We have the actual process of digestion, which is using chemicals to break down the food, so the hamburger or the salad or whatever it was that you ate, into its base components, into what we would call nutrients. Simple amino acids out of proteins, simple carbs out of complex carbs, so turning things like breads into sugars, and breaking fats down. That's going to be a chemical process. So you're using the chemistry of the molecules, those four base molecules. You've got the basis of biology, your nucleic acids, right? Your DNA, your amino acids, which are your proteins, your carbohydrates, and then your lipids, which are your fats. We then are going to go through absorption. This is extracting those nutrient materials from the digestive tract into your body's transport system, the circulatory system, which you will use to deliver those pieces to your individual cells. Okay, and then we have excretion, which is the removal of the waste products from the digestive tract and the body fluid to get rid of the metabolic wastes and the undigestible food. So we're going to be going through the digestive organs and working our way down. You need to make sure that you can identify the function and label all of the organs listed here. Okay, so esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, gallbladder, appendix, as well as a couple others, including the pancreas and the spleen. So make sure that you have your diagrams labeled. We'll be referring back to this. We might jump back to this slide a little bit later on. So starting at basically following the path of food and materials into the digestive system, we're going to begin at the oral cavity. This is your mouth. This is where food is going to be taken in. Your teeth are going to be used for mechanical processing to break down the food into smaller pieces, assuming you chew your food. And then you're going to mix that food with one of the first steps of chemical digestion, which is saliva. Saliva has a dual purpose. It's mostly water, which lubricates and allows the food to travel through the digestive system, but it also has some enzymes in it that break food apart. Saliva is really good at breaking down sugars, things like amylase in your saliva that break sugars down into simple subcomponents. So you're gonna swallow. You're gonna keep the food out of your respiratory tract with your epiglottis, and the food is gonna travel down to the esophagus. The esophagus is the hollow muscular tube that links the mouth to the stomach. What happens is when you swallow, your epiglottis closes, protecting the food from entering your larynx, which is the top of your respiratory system, and instead the food travels down into the stomach through a couple of valves that prevent backflow of stomach acid and etc. But that's going to be the main site of So here's a look at the mouth then. This is that epiglottis that we want to target. Basically what happens is you get what we would call a bolus of food, a chunk of food up in your throat. At the process of swallowing, as it's traveling down, the epiglottis is actually gonna go down. It's gonna close over your larynx, preventing you from choking, hopefully. To look at where saliva is coming from, you've got a couple of salivary glands here in your mouth. These glands aren't really well pictured here, but they're located under the tongue, at the back and top of the throat. And these are what are allowing the secretion of saliva to help with the processing of your food. That epiglottis, though, we looked in the frog, it was just called the glottis, right? And the glottis was the hard structure that protected the larynx from food, okay? And so glottis in frog, epiglottis in humans. Continuing on, so the food has arrived at the stomach. The stomach is that main organ that stores food, and it's involved in both mechanical and chemical digestion. For mechanical digestion, the stomach goes through muscular contractions that help to mix up the food and crush it down and squeeze it, etc. For the chemical digestion, the stomach is mainly using acids, especially hydrochloric acid with very low pH. We're talking pH of 2 to 3 here. So very strong pH. That's great at breaking apart bonds, chemical bonds in your food, etc. We call that mix of what you have when you have food and stomach acid mixed together. That's a substance that we call chyme. And so this is a partially digested, not solid, but not full liquid material that's traveling through your digestive system. Once the food has been exposed properly to acid and it's ready to move on, it's going to leave the stomach and it's going to go through a valve. So you've got a valve at the top of your stomach, at the bottom of your esophagus. You've got a valve at the bottom of your stomach, between the stomach and the small intestine, that control when food passes. It's going to leave that valve at the bottom of the stomach and enter directly into the small intestine. Now, your small intestine is the main site of nutrient absorption. This is where materials are going to be brought out of the food. And so this is really where, if the mechanical and chemical processes happen prior to now, the small intestine is really where you're going to harvest the materials out of the food that you're going to be sending to your cells. Upon entering the small intestine, you mix your chyme with fluid from the pancreas, liver, and gallbladder, which are going to secrete extra digestive enzymes targeting fats and carbs, and helping to break those materials down into their simpler subcomponents. So your pancreas then is that organ that releases, in its purpose for the digestive system, digestive enzymes that break down food into subcomponent nutrients. It's also responsible as part of the endocrine system for releasing insulin, okay? Separate functions, so it's one organ that's part of two different systems. Your liver, on top of filtering blood as part of your circulatory system, removing toxins, also makes a substance called bile. Bile is a fluid that's really good and used for breaking apart fatty foods. Okay, and so bile is what called emulsifies the fat. It breaks the fat down into smaller pieces. So chyme and mixes together with those enzymes in the bile, and it moves into the small intestine. And now we're going to be looking at the nutrient absorption. So this is a cross section. This would be a piece of your small intestine that's been cut, perpendicular to its length to kind of look at the structures inside there. And when we examine small intestine, we notice that it would kind of look almost like a carpet, and it would have a lot of little finger-like projections coming off of it, and those are called intestinal villi. So villi are all these little projections that rise off the intestinal wall, and their main job is to increase the surface area. So They're making it so there's more area across which you can absorb nutrients, okay? And so this is a look close up at a villi, and what you have in the villi is for each little projection, you've got a pathway of blood. So blood enters, it travels through the villi, and then it goes back out into your circulatory system. And essentially what's happening here with this blood is that the materials that you're eating are diffusing, okay, from the space of the small intestine across the cell membrane of the villi into your blood vessels. This is happening by diffusion mostly, with some active transport involved for larger substances. So this is how you're harvesting materials out of the food that you were eating. And you're using villi to increase the surface area and increase the rate of absorption of those materials. So we've moved past the small intestine. We've harvested almost all the material, nutrients out of the food. The food's now going to enter the large intestine. Okay, the large intestine is a much shorter organ than the small intestine. It's tasked mainly with reabsorption of water and the formation of a stool. Once the nutrients have been absorbed, everything that's basically left behind is waste and water. And so you extract that water to increase the efficiency of your body and reduce water loss. And then your body forms the waste products into a stool, which it's eliminated through the colon. So the colon is the bottom portion of the large intestine as we view it. And it's going to, the waste products are going to travel through and then out through the anus, that external opening of the digestive system to the environment. So to follow the pathway that we've gone through so far, we had food enter. Oh, by the way, here's a good look at the salivary glands, right? 3 salivary glands that you have. Food entered the mouth, traveled down the throat, past the epiglottis covering the windpipe to the esophagus, okay? At this point, it's been mechanically processed by the teeth with some chemical processing happening from the saliva. Food is going to enter the stomach, where it's going to be broken down with acids as well as mechanical contractions of the stomach to break it down. What we're doing here is what's called digestion, right? We're breaking the food down into its simpler pieces. Out the bottom of the stomach, it's going to travel in and through the small intestine. The small intestine is where most of the nutrient absorption is going to take place. That's the harvesting of the nutrients out of what we would call the chyme at that point. The small intestine has been aided by fluid secretions from the gallbladder and the pancreas, okay, and really speeding up the process there. After the small intestine, food is going to enter the large intestine, which is a much shorter pathway. Water is going to be reabsorbed up and out and around and out through the colon. So we're going to go through the 2 main disorders of the digestive system that could be really treated frequently with surgery. First up is appendicitis. Appendicitis is basically an inflammation of the appendix. The appendix is a little dead end portion that attaches to your large intestine right where your small intestine meets up. So your small intestine will be coming in right here on the green, and here's your appendix pictured. Now in some people the appendix can get infected. It gets bacteria in it that would swell, possibly causing it to burst, and that bursting would release basically partially digested food and fecal material into the coelom or the body cavity. That would cause a really bad infection. And so people who have inflamed appendixes, they have stomach pain, etc., and a doctor will go in usually and sort of just snip that off and get rid of that. We also have a gallbladder removal, and so some people suffer from what's called gallstones. Okay, gallstones, like kidney stones, are little calcified deposits that form in the gallbladder or in the bile duct, and that can be painful and create all sorts of digestive issues. So if somebody's suffering from that, oftentimes a doctor will also remove the gallbladder. Now, the gallbladder is it's a lot more necessary than the appendix, and removal of the gallbladder has some side effects as far as, like upset stomach and some things like that, but it's not a death sentence. The person basically then, what the doctor does is they tie the bile duct right out of the liver down to the small intestine, so there's no bile storage. Last up for this set of flip notes is going to be the excretory system. And then the excretory system is working in conjunction with the digestive system. The task of the excretory system is to really target the leftover waste from the nutrients that we bring in. In other words, not the solids that never leave the digestive system, but removing the wastes from the blood, in this case, through filtration and then removal. So the main functional organ of the excretory system is going to be the kidneys. I guess it's organs. And so the kidneys are the structures that filter blood and remove metabolic wastes and drugs from the blood. And so they basically have a lot of blood flow, as you saw in the kidneys when you look at the frog. And on top of removing the waste, they're also responsible for a lot of activities involved in homeostasis, including the regulation of ion concentration, so think salts, okay, pH of the blood pressure, so they can especially reduce blood pressure by removing excess water. So if you have high blood pressure, the kidneys are going to pull more water out to not dilute the blood, but reduce blood pressure. And so that's kind of all under homeostatic control. Remember, homeostasis, keeping the internal environment balanced. On top of those tasks, they're involved in filtration, and that's removing those unwanted products, the leftover waste products. That's things like urea, salts, okay, as well as some nitrogenous wastes. That's based around nitrogen. We already said water and sugars. The functional unit of the kidney is something that's called a nephron. And a nephron we're going to look at here on the next slide. So this is a look over here at the cross section of a kidney. So what they've done is they've taken this, and it looks like a kidney bean, big surprise, and they've cut it in half and removed, you could say like the front half, so that we can see in cross section. What you'll see is the kidney has big, giant renal arteries that deliver blood and renal veins that carry blood away from the kidney, and then these structures branch out, and they branch out into tiny little units over here that we have decided to call nephrons, N-E-P-H-R-O-N-S, nephrons. So we're not going to get into the mechanism of the nephron. This is something that you would talk a lot about in a college physiology class, but basically you should realize that the blood travels around the nephron from the red area to the blue area. As that happens, the blood drops off wastes into these little channels, these passageways. And so what these passageways do eventually is they link up to the ureter. And the ureter is a tiny little tube that connects the kidney to the bladder. And so what you're actually forming in the nephron are the basics of urine. So you're removing the water and the salts and the sugars and those other things, forming urine, and the fluids that leave the blood into this passageway. Gotta erase a little bit. Into this passageway are the components then of the urine, and so they travel down through this loop and then out to the ureter. So like we just said, the ureters then are the set of tubes that take the fluid away from the kidney to the bladder. The bladder is basically just a hollow storage site for urine. Can house a fairly large volume for its size, 2 cups, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, but that's basically its only function. The bladder connects to the outside of the body by the urethra, which we looked at in sexual reproduction, either travels and connects to the penis or to the vagina. And so that's basically the simple digestive system. There's not a whole lot of pieces to it. You have the kidney as the organ, the nephron as the piece of the kidney that's filtering things out of the blood, and then the ureters, bladder, and urethra. And the urethra as the pieces of the excretory system that are responsible for removing and storing and removing those wastes from your body. This then is a look at basically female versus male excretory systems. So we've got female over here on the left, bladders down a little bit lower, kidneys, ureters, tying into the bladder, basically to the front of the uterus, and then connecting out to the urethra. In the males, we still have the bladder, no uterus in this case, and then the urethra that connects out through the penis. Really, the only disorder that we're going to talk about for the excretory system is kidney failure. Now, the slide is about dialysis. Dialysis is the treatment for kidney failure, short term. And so anytime that the kidneys are not properly working, and you have to realize that that nephron is based around, the nephron works on osmosis and diffusion. Anytime the kidneys aren't working for some reason, you can have some major problems in the body due to the lack of homeostasis. And so you have problems with water, salts, sugars, etc., and those nitrogenous wastes that build up in your blood. And that can make somebody really pretty sick. It can lead to death if not treated. And so dialysis is a mechanical way of removing these things, utilizing a machine that mimics a kidney. And so dialysis can remove waste, salt, extra water. They can remove certain chemicals from your blood, can control blood pressure. Some people that have been exposed to toxins or poisons will use dialysis to remove those toxins from their body, etc. And basically, what happens in dialysis is somebody is hooked up to the machine. They put an IV in their arm that removes their blood, sends it through the machine, which filters and removes those waste products, and then their blood, now cleaned and free of those items, re-enters the body. We used a very old form or piece of this machine, dialysis tubing, when you guys made your artificial cells for the state lab. Dialysis tubing in that form is no longer used, but the process is still carried out on a regular basis. Dialysis is a short-term solution. Most people in kidney failure are really going to be hoping for a transplant because dialysis is something that you would probably have to do every 2 to 4 days. And it would take 3 to 6 hours, depending on the person, to sit down and go through this process. And so it's not a very comfortable way of living. There's all sorts of sort of health effects and fatigue associated with going through this process. And so people in long-term kidney failure are really going to be using dialysis to get through while they wait for a hopeful kidney transplant.